and welcome to this special discussion on the Vote for Democracy report on the 2024 elections. Vote for Democracy is a non-governmental organization based out of Mumbai, and it consists of social activists, general observers of elections, and specialists who have done long stints in very major organizations, very important professional organizations like the Indian Institute of Technology, Indian Institute of Management, and they've all come together to look at the statistics related to the 2024 Lok Sabha elections. And this report, which has come out a few days ago, has some very damning revelations. Of course, we have seen how there has been discussion about the disparity in terms of the deployment of EVMs during the elections. And then after the voting was over, there was also big questions as to why the Election Commission is taking so much time to tabulate and come out with the actual number of votes polled. And when finally the votes were counted, we also had this situation where in large number of constituencies, the total number of votes polled, the total number of votes counted, there was a great mismatch between the total number of votes polled and total number of votes counted. In some cases, it was the number of votes counted were more than the number of votes polled, and in some cases, the number of votes counted were much lesser than the votes polled. And the Vote for Democracy report looks into all these things in some great detail. We already have the report, and of course, we will be giving a link to this report in the description of this very discussion. And I have a panel of very senior people associated with the Vote for Democracy organization. We have Tista Setalwar, a writer and social activist who has been closely monitoring these elections for a very long time. Of course, Tista needs no introduction to our viewers because, she's also known to us as a social activist, a spirited social activist who takes up a large number of human rights and social causes. We have Professor Sebastian Morris from the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. He has been involved in the preparation of this report. And then we have Dr. Harish Karnik of Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur. Both these professors are retired from these major institutions. So, Tista, I think I'll start with you. Can you just sum up the report? Of course, we'll be giving the link to the report, but can you just sum up for our viewers what exactly is the findings, major findings of this Vote for Democracy report?
The context first is important, Venkatesh, as you know, and your viewers already know, because AIDEM has been also covering this issue very closely, particularly with your expose on missing EVMs, which I recall was a very important story during the election. That basically, what was the context? That there have been issues about elections conducted under with the EVM process for some time now. Those concerns have been raised, some have been dealt with, some have been kept aside. Matters have been pending in the Supreme Court, as you know, since 2013, when the Subramaniam Swamy case was heard. And the orders of the Supreme Court itself have been, over the period of time, inexplicably diluted by the same institution. But I won't go into that. I will just say this election, 2024, became particularly important for a variety of reasons. In November 2023, the Supreme Court passes a very important order clearly stating that the autonomy and the independence of the Election Commission is inviolable. In complete violation and brazen violation of that, this government, as it has done, now it's a minority government, but the earlier government was majority, and in many cases it has done before. It simply overturned that judgment by bringing in a law that excluded the Chief Justice of India from the appointment process. Not only that, in mid-March, as we know, it's on record, March 13-14, leader of the opposition complained strongly about the manner in which 200 candidates list was given to him just 4 hours before the selection committee meeting. After that, that was arbitrarily reduced to 6, and the whole thing became a sham. So basically, essentially, I just wanted to say, it was this government and the Prime Minister alone appointing the Election Commission. And 2 of the commissioners were appointed just 2 days before the announcement of the elections. One has worked very closely with the Home Minister. One has worked very closely with the Uttarakhand Chief Minister. And we had inexplicably one Chief Election Commissioner, Mr. Goel, resigning without giving reasons. So it is in this murky context that the elections were conducted. How the phases were organized, how the phases were announced, not rationally decided. Some states, large states like Tamil Nadu, reasonably large states like Andhra and Gujarat, one phase. Assam, 14 seats, 3 phases. I mean, I can go on this. It's all in the report, but that is just a background. Then we have actually the election process itself in this extremely murky, I would say, murky atmosphere. And you have the most shocking kind of violations of the Representation of People's Act in terms of speeches and hate speeches being made by the star campaigners of the ruling party. I won't go into that as well because the report that simply mentions that. But I'm just giving a context that those were also completely ignored by the Election Commission, a constitutional body which should have acted very, very firmly and should have actually at least barred those star campaigners from campaigning at least for a period of time, if not for the entire election. Having said that, now the first phase happens, then the second phase happens, and as we proceed into the 7th phase election over a very hot summer, we see that the figures given for the voting percentages and the voting numbers of the number of people who voted are just simply not being released on time. We've got experts here, so I won't go into details, but basically this is being agitated by citizens through the election. It's not something that was not agitated. Citizens took up the campaign, wrote to the EC saying that, please, why are you not releasing figures? Even a newspaper like the Times of India had released a story saying that so many crore votes have been possibly added in the first or second phase, or so many 100,000 votes had been added. So it has been a matter of concern and speculation. Why? Because, number one, never before in an election has there been this kind of delay of more than, say, 1 day or 48 hours. Normally, you just get it within a day or 48 hours. And there's not been more than a 1% deviation in the past. This time, you see a mammoth deviation, right from about 3.42, which goes up to a much higher number. And in some, so the average is, I mean, I can give you the average, which we've noted very closely. It increases from 3.2% to 6.32% average. But if you further aggregate this, then it goes to a staggering 12.54% in Andhra Pradesh, 12.48% in Odisha, and even 25% in Lakshadweep. So, I mean, it's completely crazy. I mean, it makes no sense. And the demeanor of the Election Commission. What is the Election Commission of India? A constitutional statutory body with plenary powers under Articles 324 to 326, as you know, who is answerable primarily to the people of India, not to the government in power. And yet there are no answers. It's completely opaque, obdurate in its response, and doesn't want to respond. So it is in this context, looking at all of this, that our experts guided us very, very meticulously, and our team of 3 or 4 people worked towards arriving at a set of figures that suggest a kind of mammoth increase in both votes nationally and then within states. The last point I'd like to make, was I think I've said more than enough, it's more for the speakers to say, is the 17A and the 17C forms. Now, what are these documents? The 17A is like a roll call document, as you know. It takes a roll call when we enter the booth, when you enter the booth, when I enter the booth. And that's known as a roll call document. That is also supposed to be authenticated and available. Okay? And it has to be properly registered and recorded. The 17C form is actually supposed to be legally, I mean, there's a set of guidelines, the laws, and the Supreme Court has reiterated it this March and April, that it has to be countersigned by the returning officer and given to the candidate. Now, first question we need to ask the Election Commission, which it's not answering, is how many 17C forms were not given and why? We already have on record many parties saying that we were not given forms. The DMK was ultra punctilious and got all its forms. But this has not happened as a matter of course and a legal duty or a legal right of the candidate. So this again opens the area for a lot of suspicion because you have nothing to corroborate figure by figure what we are saying.
Thank you, Krista. Actually, as you were rightly pointing out, the broader context and the kind of some of the details have already come out in through the media and have come to public domain. But what is interesting about the Vote for Democracy exercise is the kind of professional, meticulous intervention that you have brought into this report. So I will start with both Professor Morris and Dr. Karnik. Professor Morris, I'll start with you. Uh, See, you both of you are part of the independent panel for monitoring elections, but that is not your core competency. Your core competency is not monitoring elections. Your core competency in something else. So, could you tell me what is the special attribute that you have seen in this tabulation that you have done for Vote for Democracy? Can you please tell us as to what exactly you found amiss in this whole process, in this election process?
Well, for that specific question is something like this. When the polls take place and the polls close on a certain date, okay, by around the evening, you get data which is reported, which is collated by the Election Commission and reported nationally. So essentially, the data from every poll booth is put together at these sites, and then the aggregate figures are sent from every polling station or polling center, and that is put out constituency wise by the Election Commission for all the constituencies that go on vote, that go on to polling that day. So this is typically an immediate thing, and it's updated usually within a day. Uh, and more or less the difference would be hardly 1% or so. Okay. Now, this has been the case before. In this elections, though, we have found that the updation has not taken place in so many constituencies. Not only that, the time lag has been quite large, okay, going often into 7 days, 8 days, and sometimes even more. And the gap also between what the final so-called polling is and what was reported on the day of polling can be as high as what Tista brought out, 6%, 7%. It's in some regions, in some states, going to as high as 12%. Okay. So now the big question is what has happened? How were these votes cast? How were they missed out in the initial tabulation? It's a big question. I can't see any way it could have been missed out in the initial tabulation.
Stages, yeah.
Because you see, the EVMs are rather simple. So there is a registry, which is what she talked about, which is Form 17A, and the votes cast are also known, parallelly, okay, because you're keeping track of how many people came in and voted.
Yeah.
So there can be a mistake of maybe a 0.5% or a 1/4% between those who sign and those who don't cast the vote. And that is also the case because today you have nota. Okay. So given nota, if you don't want to cast a vote, then what is recorded in the paper registry where you have signed and what you cast, it should be almost nothing.
Okay? Right.
So 6%. So this is very suspicious. Okay. And it's suspicious also in the context of everything that happened before. And let me highlight those very things which Tista has talked about. But essentially, first and foremost, the appointment of the ECI was clearly violative of any kind of value in it, of any way you would do it in a democracy. In a true democracy, the opposition must have a significant role. Okay. Now, recognize that all democracies are, when they're also sovereign. Okay. So one of the big holes in the design of a democracy is how do we create a voting election mechanism which is free, because the government of the day has a huge opportunity and an ability to influence it. Okay. We were one of those economies among the many who had voting but through voting. Okay. If you count only countries which have voting, then it's practically more than you can imagine. But they're not true democracies because those are fixed. Okay. So the point is the violation of the independence of the Election Commission and many other things which was the behavior of the Election Commission. I won't get into it. Clearly partisan, clearly biased, and in a way as to let even ordinary people understand that it was clearly biased. Okay. And sheer arrogance, non-response of the ECI to a large number of complaints, papers, etc. submitted. I myself have submitted an extensive paper on how EVMs could be violated, how they could be fixed to change the entire result. Okay. And there has not been a response. Okay. Instead, what the ECI chose to do is put up a FAQ on myths and realities, and which is addressing all the core, non-core issues, and the core issues have been left out. Okay. Now coming back to this difference. Now, what the study does is it takes these differences, okay, kind of distributes them uniformly across a state or a region, okay, and then figures out the margin of victory in each of those constituencies. Okay, so if the margin of victory of whichever candidate, BJP, India Alliance, or whatever, is less than this, then it claims that so many seats are questionable.
Right.
Okay. This is a pure first cut analysis, and it's only indicative because we don't have the details. We don't have the constituency wise details. Even if we have, there are other issues as well. But this is indicative. Okay. And what it leads to is that for as many as 79 seats, constituencies, the results are controversial because the results, the margin of victory of the winning candidate is less than the difference between the two
Votes polled and votes counted.
distributed across the constituencies, because we have
Right.
do not know constituency wise what
Yeah.
what each vote, what the data for at the end closure of the day and 5 days 6 days later is. So
Right.
the point is, yeah, so so now if you look at these 79 constituencies, okay, given an odds ratio of winning 1-to-1, between, let us say, the NDA and the other
India
alliance,
Alliance.
or
Yeah.
even 1.22 for the NDA versus 1. Okay,
Yeah.
you should find equal numbers on both.
Right.
But what if it was a completely, process which was unbiased? Okay, but what you do find is it's largely in favor of the BJP. Okay, and this raises a whole lot of suspicion. Okay, so this is one, okay, which I would like to emphasize. And therefore, what we are saying is, look, for want of data, we can't be too sure about what we did, but it's indicated. Okay, please explain, what has actually happened. Why this major discrepancy, okay, between the closure date of polling and the final confirmation date?
Yeah.
Okay? Why, first of all, there is a huge gap in the timing, in the number of days that you have taken. And these are quite at odds with the claims of the ECI and the need to go for electronic voting and so on and so forth. You see, the point is, we are in a world where there is instant communication. Okay, we should have seen these accurate data reaching, let's say, by 2 hours later. If I were managing it, I'm sure it could have come 2 hours from every constituency, because no constituency, no polling booth is really far away from at least one mode of communication. Okay, the least is a telephone call. Today you can set an extended SMS.
Yeah. In fact, imagine that we used to do all this compilation and bring out the data before 48 hours during non-computer days.
Yeah, see, in the 80s, okay,
Yeah.
in the early 80s, late 70s, okay, when the Operation Flood, actually, when the milk program happened under Courier, the records of what each cooperative in a remote village delivered was actually available at the HO of the NTDB through a variety of ways. So this is like backpedaling, and backpedaling with what purpose? Okay.
That's the question. I'll come to Dr. Karnik now. Dr. Karnik, can you give us your specialized opinion on the elections, and especially how we have contributed to the Vote for Democracy report?
Yeah, okay. Tista and Professor Morris have addressed some of the issues. So let me sort of talk about things which perhaps have been left out. Okay, and let me start first with the principle and the fact that the ECI has been very strongly and obdurately in the Supreme Court been opposing this. What is the principle? I'm a voter and I want to be sure that my vote has been recorded the way in which it has been cast, and that it has been later on counted in the form in which it has been cast. Okay?
Yeah.
That is the basic principle. That's the basic principle.
Yeah.
Now, what is happening? I vote.
Yeah.
The vote is recorded supposedly in the VVPAT. The slip is there. I'm supposed to look at it for 7 seconds through a window. How many people look at it? Nobody. There's no empirical evidence as to how many people really look at it. But let's assume everybody looks at it. That is the vote that ultimately I have cast and verified, presumably.
Mm.
There is a second vote which goes into the control unit, which is recorded. Okay. Now it's elementary that if you really want to count my vote, you should count the VVPAT slips.
Right.
But what is being counted? The VVPAT slips are not counted by default. What is counted is the vote which has not been verified by me. Okay.
Mm.
Now I'm not claiming anything here, but as a computer science professional, I can say the following. The moment you have gaps of this kind, there are two votes recorded, one on the VVPAT, which I have verified, one in the control unit, which has not been verified. You have what is called a vulnerability. And vulnerabilities can always be exploited. Can be exploited. I'm not again claiming that they have been exploited. Vulnerabilities can always be exploited. So to claim that EVMs are tamper-proof and blah blah blah, that's not correct. Number one. The second thing is that this can be simply changed, right? It's a very simple thing to allow the user let that slip get printed, let that slip be printed and come out of the VVPAT, let the user look at it, verify that it's okay, and then dump it into the VVPAT box. And this is a minor modification. You still have all the apparatus. You don't have to spend extra money on trying to redo
No, but
the whole
Dr.
EVM.
Karnik, that these arguments were made before the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court is unfortunately not technically, how should I put it, informed.
Modified.
Okay. One of the first items of security that is understood by us is that when you look at security and look at risk, you assume the worst case. You don't assume the best case. To the best of my knowledge, the Supreme Court is reported to have said in open court, well, you have to trust the Election Commission. But that's the problem. You cannot. In any system, you have to assume that, what is the worst case? The worst case is every actor in this whole process is a bad actor. Then you ask the question, is the whole process safe? Or what is the risk in the whole process? Now, here you say that you're going to trust X, and X is really in charge of everything. There is nothing to do. I mean, you're not talking about security or anything. Okay. And look at how the whole process has been sort of vitiated, in my view. You ask, finally, the Supreme Court has said, okay, you have this process of, checking the so-called burnt memory. Now, what is happening there? The administrative sort of SOP, the standard operating procedure, is brought out, on 1st June, if I'm not wrong, 1st June or something like that, right? Very close to the counting day. And according to the rules, you have 7 days after that to file your complaint. There's a hefty...
But the counting is already over by the time you finalize your objections.
That's one problem. But the other problem is very simply, if I don't know how this whole process, whatever is the technical operating procedures, the standard SOP for the technical part, that has not been announced. So if I, as a candidate, go and ask somebody and say, should I file this? What is he going to answer? I don't know how it's going to be verified. And look at what has happened now. 16th July, they send out the technical SOP. And what is the technical SOP? It's a joke. It's simply saying, how do you verify what is inside the memory of the EVMs, all those 3 boxes? All the 3 boxes are supposed to be looked at. By simply redoing the whole, voting process for 1400 votes or something like of that order. Okay. Or I think it is 500,000, 1,400, something like that. And the candidate can choose which one it is. But you are just redoing it. Where is the verification of what is there in the memory? It's not, this is not a verification. This is just some input output, which does not verify anything.
It's a mock exercise.
Yeah, this is the mock exercise carried out over for 1,400 votes instead of, let's say, 100 votes, which is done before the election starts in every booth.
Right.
Before the election starts, the EVM is actually tested in front of the candidate representatives, and after that, they're supposed to clear the EVM, and then the actual voting starts.
So, see, the point is, you have talked about the larger process, but what exactly is the finding of the Vote for Democracy report in relation to these technical mismatches?
Right. So what it does is, as I said, because of these introduced vulnerabilities, and as Professor Morris already has pointed out, these huge differences. I mean, look at what is happening. Further analysis needs to be done, but look at, to my mind, and this is I have not done the detailed analysis yet, but in areas where this the vote difference between the initial announcement and the so-called final announcement, where it is large, the BJP has done much better. Okay, UP is one place. UP is one place where actually these numbers are not so large. Odisha is one place where these numbers are extremely large. In phase out of phase.
Yeah, you are also talking about it, that that it is not
right.
It is not proportionate.
So let me just clarify. See, the study doesn't get into how the EVMs could have been corrupted, the kind of arguments that Harish Karnik has put out, and so on. What it does is it simply looks at the data and says, hey, here is a problematic data. Okay. Now, very quickly, if you want to go over the arguments of why one should not use EVMs, and even if one uses it, as Professor Karnik said,
before we go into that aspect,
okay,
Professor Morris, both you and Dr. Karnik have been talking about this huge mismatch in terms of the results, especially in the 79 constituencies. But I think we have not actually kept that, though it's part of the report. Our viewers actually do not know what exactly is the discrepancy, what is the mismatch. And Dr. Karnik was saying that it's very huge when it comes to Uttar Pradesh, Odisha, and not so huge. Yeah. But I have gone through the report, and I have also seen how there is this difference between the difference in the first two phases in Uttar Pradesh is much larger than the next five phases where better monitoring was done by the opposition parties. So can you just give me some idea about these figures? Yeah.
I don't think it has anything to do with monitoring by opposition or any such thing. See, what happened is, if you do the phase-wise tabulation, it increases over the phases, and then towards the last few phases, the discrepancy falls. Okay? We don't know what the reason. But I think what Professor Karnik said is interesting, that wherever the discrepancy is higher, okay, the BJP has won. And wherever BJP has done better, okay, and the overall discrepancy is set. As I said, the odds ratio is 1.2 at best to 1. If you take the ex ante probability of, let us say, the BJP winning BJP's vote share. Okay. However, in the seats where there is a discrepancy, okay, the BJP wins the larger number by a wide margin, which makes it suspicious. This is similar to the original argument made in a paper by, I think, I forget the name, a scholar in one of our universities. We had to leave it.
Ashoka University.
Ashoka University, that's right. What's his name? Yeah.
Das.
So he argued that wherever the margin of victory
Sabyasachi Das.
Sabyasachi, yeah. So where it's small, the odds ratio should have been 1:1, or maybe even 1.5:1, even if you grant that. Yet the BJP seems to have won every seat where the margin of victory is small. Okay, so these are reasons for suspicion, and the report is focused on. Okay? But I think we should not ignore what.
Can we have the numbers? Yeah,
Yeah,
of the
just go
70.
through the tables, Professor Morris. If you go through those two tables that we had gone through
Yeah,
in
so,
Mumbai. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me just summarize. The tables are there. I'm sure she can give you the report, where the details are there, because it goes over several pages and, and so on. So essentially what you're saying is the discrepancy can be as high as 12%, as low as 3%. Okay. 3 itself is higher than what it used to be in the past, which was under 1%. Okay. That's number one. But recognize number two, the gap between the time the polling was closed and when the final confirmation was made can often stretch over days, several days, 5 days, 6 days, and some of them have not yet been confirmed. Okay?
Yeah.
So the point is that itself makes it extremely suspicious and points to an EC which claimed that technology can make everything better. In fact, the sole argument that they have, the sole really worthwhile argument, seemingly worthwhile argument that they have is that EVMs lead to faster counting.
Yeah.
Okay? It leads to only faster counting if you ignore, and reliability. Okay?
Would you like me to go through the numbers,
I think
Venkatesh?
Mr. would have the
Yeah,
numbers.
please. Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
Or Professor Karnik, would you like to go through the EVM numbers first, Professor Karnik? The
No,
EVM
go
difference.
ahead.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
I
basically,
just mentioned
yeah,
few things. Okay, before
yeah,
you take the, you talk about the exact numbers.
yeah.
Okay, the first thing is, there are discrepancies which are public. They are on the board, so to say. There are almost 540 out of 543 constituencies have a discrepancy between the votes polled, the final votes polled, and the final votes counted. Okay.
Yeah.
Some 140 plus of them have a very strange situation where the votes counted is more than the votes polled.
Yeah.
Okay. And of course, the other 340 odd are votes counted are less than the votes polled. Now, unofficially, I think it came on Twitter or X. One of the not one of the election commissioners in ECI, but one of the others in one of the state election commissioners pointed out that there could be two reasons why the votes polled could be more than the votes counted. Okay. And the two reasons were that number one, while counting, that is when you actually count the box. So basically you take the box and you press a button and the total votes that are polled in that box and the votes for each of the parties or candidates is flashed. So you just make a record of that. So it's possible that some boxes failed at that point.
Right.
Okay, so that box didn't get counted. In the other case, it is possible that the mock poll which is conducted just before the actual voting starts, that is supposed to be erased. Right. The presiding officer in the booth is supposed to erase that, and then the actual voting starts. Yeah. Now, that may not have been erased. Okay, that is a possible reason. So these are the two reasons given for the first case.
What are the number of mock poll votes that come into this mock poll per polling booth?
They are of the order of 100 or so, maximum.
Yeah, so that's where it's very important, and a very important question is that, you see, 542 seats went to the polls because Surat was never allowed to go to the polls because it was unilaterally declared as elected, despite the fact that the Nota voters might have been aggrieved by not knowing the figures or whatever. But anyway, so 542 seats went to the elections. Out of these 542, now Professor Karnik has given us the broad figures. We actually went into all the data in this report, and it's annexed here. Only 4 seats was there no discrepancy between the votes polled into the EVM recovered
and the votes counted and vote.
And these are exchanged. Their seats of Daman and Diu, Amreli in Gujarat, Attingle in Kerala, and Lakshadweep. Okay, now of the 538 seats left, you have 174 constituencies where the votes recovered from EVMs are more than those polled. 174. Now,
Yeah.
what is the margin? You asked the question about how many are the mock polls. The margins vary from 1 vote to 3,811 votes.
My God.
Okay, so it cannot be the mock poll argument. That's number one.
Yeah.
Secondly, there is a 174 seats out of in another 374 constituencies. Votes are recovered that are less, and these vary from 1 vote to 16,791 votes. Now, there's one more figure which we found interesting because Dr. Pyara Lal Garg was the one who's doing these figures, and he keeps finding something new every time he looks at the figures. That 169 out of 542, which is roughly 1/3 of all the seats, the difference in margin of victories is only 10,000.
Okay.
In 1/3 of the total seats. So, I mean, look at all of this together. I mean, the fact is, like, as was stated by the eminent academics, we are giving indicators. We are giving indicators that this is what has happened. Huge amount of vote dumping has happened across states. It could have had huge implication for the results. Surely the ECI owes us an explanation seat by seat. Let's also remember two things. One is that they never release the actual voting figure. They only release percentages. Why?
Yeah.
And secondly, in phase 2, they have not even released the state-wise figures. They've just released the national figures.
Okay.
So this makes it even more suspicious because phase 2 was beneficial, we know, as to one party. So there are too many variables which are not explained in this whole exercise. And on May 25th, you have the Chief Election Commissioner, Mr. Rajiv Kumar, saying that not a single vote will be more than the EVM. He's on record saying. He doesn't hold conferences through the whole process, the election. So there are too many things. I can take you to the actual numbers, but I think Professor Morris wants to say something.
Yeah, I think first of all, for the discrepancy, one possibility is the mock poll, but the difference is so much that it's
that's right. Yeah.
And see, the point is, it's not the first time we are using EVMs. We are using the third time, okay, for these national elections. And by now, if the ECI staff do not know that they have to erase the mock polls, I don't know what we are talking about. Okay, then the entire process can be considered as a sham. So if the ECI uses the idea that mock polls have resulted in it, they will have to show how many mock polls in how many machines were not erased. Okay?
Yeah.
Then the big question is why so? Okay. Now the point is it could not be. It has to do with something else, and they seriously owe an explanation.
No, but the point is, the election commission in this election particularly, I mean, in 2019 also we have faced a similar situation because this difference between lack of votes, the number of votes polled and number of votes counted was flagged at that point of time also. But what we have seen in the conduct of this election commission, at least over the last two elections, from 2019 to 2024, is that complete stonewalling. See, as journalists, we know earlier, when we used to send a mail to the election commission, you would get at least an acknowledgement. These days, you don't even get an acknowledgement. There is complete stonewalling of all the questions.
So it's not surprising to me, though, okay, because I'll go back to the very way in which the election commission was appointed. Okay, see, the government of the day in every country, even in the finest democracies, have a vested interest in ensuring that they come back. However, the processes and the institutional arrangements are such as to make that a very difficult thing, if not impossible. Okay. Now, the point is what you said about the progression of the retreat from a fair election is there. I agree fully with that. It's not that 2019 was particularly fair, but from then on to the present, you see, even the pretense that I need to appear to be fair is being given up. Okay, the election commission has to be fair and also appear to be fair. Okay, so today clearly even the appearance of being fair is being given up. Okay, and look at the kind of responses that the ECI has had vis-a-vis the courts, and the courts were easily and completely confused. I will just raise one issue here, which I hope is not missed. The sampling. Okay, so if you ask somebody with let us say, a passing familiarity, he would say, okay, 2% sample is fine. Counting between the EVM and the VVPATs. Now, this had gone to court, and the court took the advice of the ISI. Okay, and the ISI ruled that 2% is okay, which finally became about 5. Things, which is completely fallacious. See, that argument, despite it coming from the ISI, is completely fallacious, and I'll tell you why. See, an argument of 5% or that percentage, 2% or whatever, is okay if there is a random probability of any machine being spoiled. Okay. See, I have a computer right now, its processor can fail, something can fail, So given the number of components and so on, they did a fair calculation to a question which was wrongly posed. What was the question posed? If a machine randomly failed, given its components, serialization and so on, what is the probability, what is the sampling that we need to check whether the machine has failed? And the answer of 2 is okay today, probably even less, I would say, because machines don't fail that easily today. But the point is not that. The point is that the government of the day has a very, very strong incentive to corrupt the machine at its very core, not to hack it. I mean, the ECI talks about hacking as if somebody from Japan, some guy on the road wants to hack it. I don't know what money he's going to get. But the reality is somebody who's influential outside, okay, like a government outside, or a party within, or the government of the day, which is best placed to corrupt the machine, can actually corrupt. Okay.
Yeah, Professor Morris, to put it differently, I would say that that even if there is no manipulation has happened, everything has happened within the framework of 2 to 5%, which the Election Commission has set for discrepancies overall. Even so, when questions like this are being raised on specific points, the Election Commission is bound to answer.
Yeah, but see the number of emails which would have gone to the Election Commission. If you were to poll and find out about that, it would exceed a few tens of thousands, is my guess. Okay. Now, the point is, I understand that they have a problem, but they need a method to sift out. They seem to be looking at them, but they also are trying to confuse and give the wrong answers. I would refer you to a myths and realities paper which the Election Commission has put up on the site.
I have read it. I have gone through it. Yeah.
It's absurd. It is absurd. I can send you a rejoinder if you are interested. Okay.
Certainly.
Yeah. So my point is that this particular fact, this particular issue, needs to be treated in a very different way. See, let me also make this statement. See, what is an EVM doing? Okay, it's bringing out some conveniences. Now, if you have paper ballots, okay, the probability that something seriously goes wrong, which affects every ballot, every box, is practically zero. Okay, so it is reliable. It may not be very accurate. Okay, whereas an EVM, suppose if it is doctored at source, that means at the manufacturing process, then the bug is there in every EVM.
Absolutely.
Right? Therefore, the entire elections have been manipulated. Therefore, you could easily have a regime which had no basis to be. And the future of the country is changed when the people did not want it. Look at the ramifications. So from simple governance and approach to human action, we know that humans should avoid small probabilities over which we have some choice to make of events. We must avoid those kind of events where with a small probability that can happen, but if it happens, the impact is extremely consequential. Okay, it is on this count that the advanced countries thought it through and kept away from EVMs fundamentally.
Yeah, I also want to come back to this report because it also brings out the conduct of the returning officers in many constituencies which have been documented. And there are reports of many more which are undocumented. And it actually led to about 150 or 200, I'm not sure, former IAS officers writing to returning officers across the country this election, reminding them that you owe your responsibility first to the Constitution, not to the government of the day. Because it is eventually an IAS officer under that state government, that under the Representation of People's Act, becomes for the election period an official of the Election Commission. We know that, the RO. So, the RO's conduct, and I'll give you the example of my constituency, where the candidate, Sena Uddhav Thackeray candidate Amol Kirtikar lost by 48 votes. Okay. Now, interestingly, he tried, Professor Karnik knows that, he tried to get his foot in to get the technical SOP because he wanted to pay the money and actually get the microprocessor, this thing. They stonewalled that. By the time the technical SOP has come out on July 16th, he has lost that 7-day window given by the Supreme Court. He also asked, by the way, for videography, which the Election Commission is duty bound to give, because there's a circular of the Election Commission which says any candidate asking for videography of the counting booth, you're required to give it. He was called to give it by the collector of Mumbai, asked to come with a hard disk, and then inexplicably refused a day later. So I'm only mentioning that there are also those kind of problems, which we know, micro problems, maybe we have documented in about 25 constituencies. They could have happened in more.
So basically, Tista,
India Today did an interview, which is not the thing. I don't want to comment on commercial media channels, but where you had Mr. Qureshi and Mr. Lavasa actually going on record, former election commissioners, going on record, talking about the Election Commission's attitude on this kind of obduracy on releasing voting percentage figures. I'm coming back to the core of the report. And they actually said that this is not on, it is unprecedented, it should not happen. So this is two election commissioners. And then you come to the numbers. I mean, unless we stick to the numbers at one point, the wider arguments will not make sense. That's why I want to come back to the numbers.
Absolutely.
Eventually, let's come back to the numbers in this report, table 1 and table 2, which actually gives you an aggregate figure of 4 crore 65 lakhs across the country, something. And then divides that per state, which makes it 18 seats in Odisha, 11 seats in Maharashtra by that methodology, 10 in Bengal, etc., etc. So I think we need to come back to those numbers, because that is what makes the whole thing pretty scandalous in its implications, even if it's not hard, in the sense, hard truth yet.
Yeah, of course, these are all projections,
Yeah.
but these projections are very important. See, basically, what I was trying to say, because we're also kind of, running out of time in the sense, that we need to conclude it. But the point is, I would like to look at the technical aspects of this study, case by case, and maybe we can do some short videos, 10-minute videos, which we can kind of, I think we should look at each and every aspect which is there mentioned in the report, and we'll do separately. I hope Professor Morris and Dr. Karnik will be able to give us time for that. But then,
it's obviously their passion. They've actually followed this for a long, long time. We've not even had time to deal with the totalizer technique, which we have referred to in the report. But why did this government suddenly abandon the totalizer technique, which the Election Commission was recommending and the Supreme Court was recommending? Which means that you respect the anonymity of the voter. And you actually, in technical language, mix up the EVM votes, which used to happen with the booths earlier. Yeah.
So anyway, I think we should go into all these things separately, so that it will be a kind of education series also. But I want to get into the larger question now, Tista, because this report is there, and it is very clearly, the headline suggests that the election has been stolen. It does not say for sure, but doesn't state it in so absolute terms. But we have enough indications to say that the elections have been stolen, and you have got the data to prove it. But in a context where large sections of the media are silent about a significant report like this, and in a situation where the Election Commission is systematically stonewalling, how do you take this report to the people, and how do you make it worth its effort?
What we have done is, therefore, and I know you're aware of this, a 65-page notice was sent to the Election Commission on the 19th of July, last Friday. Okay, this is the Election Commission notice, and it has been signed by a vast array of individuals, experts, people's movements, etc., including, I'll give just some examples, apart from Professor Harish Karnik himself and Mr. Devasahayam, who's a former IAS officer. We also have, we have also Prafulla Samantaraji of Lok Shakti Manch, Odisha. We have Dr. Sunilam, who's Kisan Sangharsh Samiti, Madhya Pradesh. So mass leaders, farmers movement, environmental leaders, tribal leaders, Roma from the All India Union of Forest Working People, Adivasi leaders, who also feel that this election process needs to be looked at seriously. Now, what does the Election Commission notice say? It actually goes through the various levels of egregious violations according to us, mentions these two tables and the figures, and asks for an answer and asks for an audience, saying that we've got all this data, we've got this, we've been working on this for 5 weeks. It's not really our job to be doing this, but we've done it because there was a huge concern about how this election was conducted. And in the best faith, we have done it. We are putting it before you. You are a statutory body accountable to us. So please do immediately take note. And the interesting thing is that the demands in this election notice, not prayers, because we are going before a statutory body, is that order a thorough investigation into all the irregularities and etc. That have been pointed out by an autonomous body, and let that body function transparently. Take immediate remedial action. Set aside the election of the illegally returned candidates on ground of non-compliance with the provisions of the Constitution or the Representation of People's Act, rules or orders made under this Act, and immediate registration of FIRs against those who have violated the law. Countermand the election in the constituencies where large-scale spurious injection of votes has taken place, as per the list provided in Annexure B and C. So that's per the list of 79 constituencies. So we've done this. And do we expect an answer? You know better than me do. I think Professor Kadnik knows, Professor Morris knows. But there was no other recourse possible. Once we do this, we probably give it a fortnight's time for there to be a time gap. We had it hand-delivered to the Election Commission last Friday in Delhi. We were asked to come back with 2 more copies for the 2 other election commissioners. We've done that as well. And now, after a fortnight, we'll have a meeting of the collective who has signed this report, which is outside Vote for Democracy, and see what people feel should be the next step. Immediately after the meeting in Bombay, the press meet in Bombay, Mumbai, where Professor Morris was present, the feeling was Dr. Bharat Patankar is a signatory. He's a well-known leader from rural Maharashtra. He's also a signatory. And Lok Morcha will jointly organize the press meet with the Vote for Democracy. He feels strongly that we should take this issue to the people because the Maharashtra elections are coming in October. So there are various suggestions coming. But like I said, the first step has been taken by sending a notice to the Election Commission. Now we have to take a collective decision as to where we go next.
I think this discussion, we need to close it here, and we look forward to the action plan as it unfolds. We will be covering it very closely. Thank you very much, Professor Karnik and Professor Morris.
Thank you.